Hello everyone, welcome to Tejal KHANDELWAL Study Center. Hope all of you have revised Plato, Aristotle, Machiavelli, Hobbes through the previous videos. Today's topic is Western political thought, John Locke. So let's revise John Locke together. John Locke is the father of liberalism. Weber says, next to Hobbes, the greatest figure in the history of English political thought is John Locke. If we look at the circumstances of John Locke's life, then the glorious revolution of 1689 coincided during his lifetime. In this, the English people successfully and peacefully transformed an absolute monarchy into a parliamentary democracy. Locke then went into exile for some period of time. Now, it is said that the unique achievement of Locke is that there is no liberal before Locke, even though there are many socialists before Marx. Let's move to the works of Locke. The first treatise of civil government is to refute Filmer's theory. Filmer's theory gives the basis for divine origin of the state, and Locke refutes this argument on various grounds. The second treatise on civil government is to refute Hobbes. Here he talks about the social contract and differs from Hobbes on the state of nature as well as the social contract. In an essay concerning human understanding, he talks about the experiential basis of knowledge, which means he lays an empirical basis of knowledge and does not believe in an innate idea to gain basis of knowledge. The other is his thoughts on education. Vaughan says that the treatises of Locke's are a gun with two barrels. One is to refute Filmer and one is to refute Hobbes. If we look at the context within which Locke was writing, there have been various influences in this context. The first is Filmer's Patriarcha, which justified the theory of divine origin of the state and absolute government. The first treatise on civil government refutes the arguments of Filmer. From Hobbes, Hobbes says that all institutions of society are for serving the interest of individuals. Locke refutes the arguments of Hobbes in his second treatise. But somebody who had a key impact on Locke's thought was Algernon Sidney. Algernon Sidney says authority rests on consent. Without an element of consent, there cannot be any authority, and thus sovereignty should always lie with people. On the other hand, we see that in Hobbes' idea, state becomes sovereign. But this is not the context. The state being the sovereign is not the context in Locke's social contract and its implications. Hooker talks about the theory of consent and contract, and he gives supremacy of parliament over the king. And this also influences Locke to a very large extent. Now, let's look at the methodology of Locke. Locke is an empiricist, which means that whatever knowledge we gain in life should be based on our sense experience. On the other hand, we have already seen that Plato says there is a universal idea or innate idea that exists in eternal reality. But Locke says there is nothing like an innate idea that is there. In fact, everything that human beings learn is learned through experience. Knowledge is learned through experience, and knowledge is not, the premise of knowledge is not any innate idea. So Locke says that mind is tabula rasa, which means mind is what? Mind is like a clean slate. So mind does not have any pre-existing innate ideas. Individual learns through various experiences of his life. Now, if Locke is saying that there are no innate ideas and everything is learned through sense experience in life, and knowledge is also learned through the experiences of his life, then we can see a contradiction in Locke's philosophy. How there is a contradiction in Locke's philosophy? Because he justifies natural law or law of nature based on moral reason. He justifies natural rights which are existing in every individual by the virtue of being human. So, his experiential theory of knowledge or empiricism or mind is tabula rasa is in contrast through his concept of natural rights and law of nature. That's why we can see there is a philosophical ambiguity in Locke. Now, he is known as the father of liberalism. If we look at the liberal worldview, if we look at the virtues of liberal democracy today, the characteristic features of liberal democracy today, the premises of this entire liberal worldview can be derived on the philosophical basis or thought of Locke. Let's see how. Locke says man is rational, man has reason, and he gives primacy to the individual. He says every man has natural rights by the virtue of being human. Private property, according to him, is the epitome of individual rights. Because he emphasizes on individualism, it is said that he is an individualist out and out. So, he justifies private property on the basis of individual rights. According to him, contract forms the juridical basis of the creation of the state. And state has various wings like the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. He also lays the basis of constitutional state. The civil society, according to him, is an artificial construct because he equates the civil society and political society. His concept of society is different from his concept of civil society or political society. So he uses the term civil society in a very specific manner. He says political authority, the political authority of any political authority, there is also a right to resistance that is available. But he is very conservative in his temperament. He is not revolutionary. So he does not want revolution, but revolution can be a resort as a last measure. However, he says, or there is question, whether he provides the right of resistance to everybody. According to Locke, there is right of resistance, but only to majority. Now let's see that what is the liberal worldview and how all these thoughts can be vitally linked to the philosophical basis of liberalism laid down by Locke. So, liberal worldview has the premise of individual more important than society, which is there. In fact, societal emphasis is there in the philosophy of socialism. For Locke, rights are very important and The liberal worldview emphasizes on freedom of individual. It talks about limited government. Even Locke talks about negative state, limited government, government as a trust, and he also talks about separation of power so that no organ of the state becomes very, very powerful. He talks of a minimal state. He talks of the importance of constitutional authority. He also talks about the separation of powers. We will understand it today. He talks of sovereignty of people. He talks about property rights, and he talks about tolerance. He talks about the value of tolerance. He is known as the theorist of consent, resistance, and toleration. So, the pluralist basis and tolerance as a virtue of liberalism that is relevant even in the present times can be linked to the basis that has been laid down in the thought of Locke. So, yes, he is rightly having the unique achievement to be a liberal before anybody else. Now let's see what is the refutation of Locke's of Filmer's patriarcha. According to Filmer, Adam has been created by God and granted the right over as a king on the earth and the products on the earth. And Adam is the first father as well as the first king. According to Filmer, paternal authority is analogous to political authority, and patriarchal authority is also absolute in nature. Filmer says there should not be anything like a social contract, and there cannot be anything like a right to property, because God has given property in common and not to anybody in specific. However, Locke refutes many arguments of Filmer and reiterates his arguments even in the second treatise. Let's see. So, firstly, wherein Filmer has spoken of the divine basis of the origin of state, which means God is the basis, or God has given the grant to Adam to hold political authority. Locke says, in fact, political authority emanates because of contract that is coming into picture. So, Locke says state is artificial in nature. It is a creation of man, creation of free will, creation of consent of individuals. So, he will refute Filmer's basis of divine origin and give the social contract as the basis of origin of the state. Then in the second treatise, he says that the arguments that he gives, he says, firstly, God has not given any relevant power to Adam. Now, even if we assume, he says, that God has given some power to Adam, that does not mean that the heirs of Adam, which means the future generation of Adam, have the right. Okay, let's assume if the future generations also have a right, does not mean there are any clear rules of what will be the rules of succession. He says, imagine if there are even clear rules of succession. It is still impossible to identify Adam's actual heirs. Thus, the whole essence of contradiction of Filmer is to contradict, firstly, divine origin of state, and how Filmer says there should not be any right to property. Locke says there is right to property, which is a natural right of every individual that exists even in the state of nature. Alright? Now, there is a saying that it was very easy to defeat Filmer and refute Filmer. But actually, the true contradiction or the true alternative argument that Locke wanted to give was towards Hobbesian philosophy. But Hobbes in himself is so logically correct and so consistent that it is very difficult to propound any thought against Hobbes. So we can say that yes, Hobbes is more logically correct. But who has a better common sense? That is Locke. Who can be practiced more? That is Locke. Fine. Now let's move to the next. What is his view on human nature? Lasky says every thinker is a child of his times. Though circumstances and individual witnesses around him shapes his political thought. Just like the revolution that occurred during the time of Hobbes brings his view towards human nature in a pessimistic light because of the Anglo-Spanish War, the Puritan Revolution. On the other hand, Locke has witnessed the Glorious Revolution. And in fact, there is an extent also where he may be apologetic or maybe he has even justified the revolution. But Locke's witness of this glorious revolution is laying a positive view of human nature, which means, according to Locke, change can come because man possesses reason. Change can come in a more positive light. Does not mean that there is always anarchy which leads to a social contract. That we see in Hobbesian philosophy. So Hobbes' view on human nature is what? Pessimistic. But does he give a scientific basis like the motions and the motions that have been explained in Hobbesian philosophy? No. He does not give a scientific basis. He gives a common sense understanding, and through his experiences, he gives a positive view of human nature. According to him, man is altruistic. According to him, human psychology is more humanistic. Man is moral, man is social, and man is rational, which means reason dominates passion in man. Unlike Hobbes, who says passion dominates reason in man. According to him, all men are equal, not only physically, as Hobbes says, but even morally, men are equal. Men have moral reasoning in them. They know what is good in their benefit and benefit only when they will cooperate with each other and show good behavior or moral behavior towards other individuals. So he says, men are peace-loving, decent, orderly and capable of ruling themselves. He says, because men are moral and rational and social and capable of ruling themselves, they possess natural rights, and that is the life, liberty and property. And these are innate in every individual. Thus, even though he gives a positive account of human nature, he is not able to give a scientific basis of the pleasure and pain theory or desire and aversion explanation as given by Hobbes. Now let's understand what he talks about the state of nature. So we already saw in Hobbes the state of nature. It is a hypothetical construct. It is an imaginary construct. There is no historical account. But there is one difference between state of nature between Hobbes and Locke. First idea is Locke is still trying to give some historical explanation of the state of nature. Hobbes is not giving any historicity of the state of nature. For him, it is a mental construct. It is a hypothetical situation that he is devising in order to provide justification for the social contract that he will be talking and the absolute political authority that he sets up. So for Locke, there is some account of historicity that exists. Now, with respect to state of nature, in the state of nature, according to Hobbes, there was no society because men did not have reason. Men are innately not social, they are social only for their selfish interest. But Locke says no, that is not there. Society always existed. Maybe political society does not exist. Maybe civil society does not exist. But society always existed. Existence of society, which means men are able to come together. They are able to live together peacefully. So his state of nature, we see, is pre-political but not pre-social. Therefore, his state of nature, there was no political society that existed. Alright? Now, conditions in his state of nature. Since human nature is also a positive account, obviously for him the state of nature will also be a positive account. So he says it was a state of peace, goodwill, mutual assistance, preservation of life and peace. He says there were tolerant individuals who had reason and peace prevailed. However, you need to understand that what is the position of Locke when we talk about his state of nature. Is it ideal when he says there is state of peace, goodwill and mutual assistance? Is it like the Satya Yuga in Hindu mythology? No. Locke is not being idealistic. Neither he is being pessimistic like Hobbes who say there was anarchy. He is adopting a middle path. He says there was not idyllic happiness also. मतलब सब कुछ एकदम बढ़िया भी नहीं था और सब कुछ एकदम बुरा भी नहीं था और एनार्की नहीं थी जैसे हॉब्स कहता है. It is a mid path, which means why he is creating that mid path? From this mid path only he will be able to justify why a social contract will happen. So he says that despite in the state of nature that men were good, they were peace loving, they were doing mutual assistance, there were something known as inconveniences. And why there were inconveniences in the state of nature? Let's see. The inconvenience in the state of nature is because there is no common political authority. Everybody is interpreting law in their own vested interest. There is no judicial authority. There is no common executive or government. So, in case, if there is any conflict, everybody will become a judge in their own case. In such a condition, how to resolve problems of life? So, because of these inconveniences and to overcome these inconveniences, men enter into a contract. Okay? That is how he establishes the basis for the contract. So, the inconveniences, he says, men are free and equal, okay? But there is no commonly acknowledged superior. There is no common judge to punish violation of natural law. No established law which can say that what is the standard of right and wrong. And there are conflicts and uncertainties which are bound to arise because everyone will become a judge in his own case. So he says there is possibility of danger. And what will be the danger? That we may have to go towards something which is bad. So to prevent these dangers, what can be done? We will have to organize ourselves in a political context. Okay? Now what about the law of nature in the state of nature? So Hobbes says law of nature does not hold too much place. In state of nature there is law of jungle, or law of nature does not hold place because it does not have what? Even if man has reason. But any law which does not have backing, which does not have enforcement is not law. So for Hobbes, only civil law which is created by sovereign, will hold importance. But what about Locke? Locke will say that is not the situation. Law of nature or natural law always existed because men have moral reasoning. So, there is natural rights which are like liberties, and there is something like a natural law which can act as constraints on individual. So, he says that reason governs the state of nature, and this natural law existed in the state of nature. Okay? Why? Because human beings are social creatures capable of rising above sheer self-interest. According to him, there are no civil laws in the state of nature, but still it is the law of nature which guides the conduct of individual. तो इनकी स्टेट ऑफ नेचर में नेचुरल राइट्स भी प्रेजेंट है जो लिबर्टी की तरह देख सकते हैं, और नेचुरल लॉ या लॉ ऑफ नेचर भी है जो कंस्ट्रेंट्स की तरह एक्ट कर रहे हैं. फाइन. सो व्हाट इज द राइट्स दैट आर एग्जिस्टिंग? राइट टू लाइफ, लिबर्टी एंड प्रॉपर्टी. So there is some, challenges when we look at Lockean philosophy. Now, natural rights. So he is the first one who is actually a propounder of natural rights. Hobbes says natural rights का कोई सेंस ही नहीं है. क्यों? क्योंकि enforceable mechanism जहां नहीं है, तो उन rights का क्या मतलब? This is like a wholesale liberty without any protection. तो उन बातों का कोई सेंस नहीं बनता. Who will protect? Because man तो क्या है? There is might is right. So every individual is dominating the other. Now let's see what Locke says. So Locke says that natural rights are inherent and born. As soon as an individual is born, it always there by the virtue of being human. Okay? They are not something that has to be created, and they are not something that can be taken by government. The very idea that they are innate or they are inherent, which means there is no other source which is giving these natural rights. Neither the government, neither the what? Neither the God, like the filmer is saying. Okay? Neither it is something which is created. It is innate. And this only again becomes a philosophy in the 20th century called as human rights, which means we don't need any government to protect human rights like that, or we don't need any international thing. Human beings across the world have human rights. So that's how this theory will be working in the 20th century. It belongs to human even in the state of nature. That is right to life, liberty and property. It is inalienable and indivisible. It is, inviolable. You cannot violate it. So difference between Hobbes and Locke is there on this context with respect to what? With respect to the concept of natural rights. Okay? So in Hobbes' view, we say man do possess natural rights. However, we cannot treat him as a theorist of natural rights, because what happens? Might becomes right in his state of nature. On the other hand, in Locke's state of nature, man is living a social life, and since people respect each other's existence of society is possible. Okay? Now, what is the link between natural rights and natural law or law of nature? So we can say that natural rights is like a liberty. Liberty of what? To have your life, to have your liberty, to possess property. And what is natural law? Natural law is like a constraint. Ki every individual, because they have natural rights, we have to respect that. Every individual on their own, because they are moral, they have reason, they will not violate the natural right of anybody. So natural law is like a constraint and natural rights is like a liberty. Okay? This is the difference between natural rights and natural law. Now, so it's like one is like a duty, we can say, right? And one is like a right. Now let's move towards the right to property. So why we are discussing this idea of right to property? Because he makes the right to property as a natural right. So let's see what he says about property, the right to property. Now, we need to understand some things very clearly. So, what is property? First, understand. We have to understand that property is like a right. It is not like a thing. It is not like merely a material object. Okay? Property is like a relationship of ownership that exists between the one who possesses it and the object. So let's define it more appropriately. We can say that property acknowledges a relationship of ownership that exists between the object in question and the person or group to whom which it belongs. So it is like a relationship of ownership. It can be defined by some custom, by some convention, as well as by some law. However, and because of this, what it does, what is the implication of this? It gives the ability to use and dispose of an object. So obviously there is some set of element of responsibility also if you have a property, to preserve it, to maintain it and do other things. Fine. So this is the concept of property. Property should not only be looked at as a thing. Okay, it should be looked more like as a right or a relationship of ownership. Fine. Now let's see what Locke says about the right to property. So he looks at right to property at two levels. One, at a very broad level, which means he says everything that is being happening, that men coming together to form a commonwealth, is also to protect it. So in one way, at the broadest way, we can say that he makes it a natural right. And if we look at it as a narrow level, it is meaning that everybody has the right to possess and retain one's own estate. Okay. So it is like there is some sort of a possessive individualism at a narrow level, and at a broad level it is more philosophical because he makes it as a natural right. Alright. Now, what is Locke's idea in the context of property? So Locke says that every individual, we should also understand property which is there beyond external property, which means a land can be your external property. But within an individual also there is property. How within individual there is property? That is, your labor is also your property, which means if I have a garden and I don't have a garden, and if there are apples in that garden, I go and put my labor to pluck those apples from the garden, then I have what? I have ownership over my labor. So he says we should also think beyond external property. Within every individual, there is labor theory of ownership. And even Marx is inspired by the labor theory of ownership. Which theory? So any individual who mixes his labor in anything can possess it. Labor theory of ownership. Even my labor is my property. Don't look at property only as an external thing. Is this understood? So he gave it in this context also. We have to understand Lockean theory of property as a labor theory of ownership also. Alright? Now, we'll read up some statements so that makes us understand his right to property at the broadest level also. Alright? Now let's see. So the first statement is, if we understand in context of natural rights and other things, he says, the great and chief end of men's uniting into commonwealth and putting themselves under the government is the preservation of their property, which means to protect their natural right, men are coming together. Government is also being formed because men want to protect their natural right. Government has no other end but the preservation of property, which means, say Locke, the preservation of people's life, liberty and estate. Liberty is a property right for Locke because to have property in one's person implies the right to think, speak and act freely. So, property in Lockean sense is not only of the external property, it is also in the sense of labor theory of ownership. Within an individual also what is there? There is property. Alright? Because we all can work. That is why we have. Right? Now, so does he put any limitations on property? Can everybody have like an, unfettered right or unlimited right of appropriation? No. So he does put limitations on everything, okay, beyond his fruits of labor. He argues that there should be enough and as good left in common for even others. So the limitations, first limitation is the spoilage limitation, which means acquire only if you can make good use of it, since nothing is made by law of nature to be spoiled or destroyed. So you're not allowed to do spoilage. उतना ही acquire करो जितना तुम use कर सकते हो. So first is the spoilage limitation. Second is sufficiency limitation, which means acquire only that much that is needed. Don't acquire more than what is needed. Okay. Now, leave even enough for others to acquire. And labor limitation, which means as long as one can put, okay, their labor, then they have the right to own. If they do not put labor, then no. So he says one can appropriate only that much of common resource with which he has mixed his labor. Fine. So yes, C.B. Macpherson actually criticizes Locke's views on right to property and he calls him as a scholar of possessive individualism, because Locke is going to according to C.B. Macpherson's view, he is going to a very large extent to justify property, making property as the sole basis of everything in the state of nature and natural rights philosophy. Fine. But there are also other thinkers who says that Locke is not only justifying property, he is adding certain limitations on the idea of ownership of property. So he is also trying to balance individualism and paving the way for the community and the social good. So yes, there are different views or different interpretations on how Lockean views on right to property has been interpreted. Okay. Now, so since we were discussing natural rights, that's why I took up the right to property in detail. Now let's move towards the theory of contract. So we've already understood his views on human nature. We have already understood what he talks about state of nature. And now we will be moving towards what is the idea of social contract that he is devising. Now, so first, it is a misnomer to call his social contract as a social contract. Why? Because already society exists for him, which means his entire concept is that state of nature, even in the state of nature, society existed. Society is not coming, or element of cooperation is not coming after the formation of contract. People had natural laws to restrict their behavior. People had natural rights also, which were respected. Okay. So his idea of social contract, or using the term social contract, can be a misnomer. It can be more like a political contract. Fine. So we also see that there are two contracts. In the first contract, for him, political society is being created or civil society is being created. And in the second context, in the second concept, he is making what? He is creating government also, okay, which becomes like a trustee. So, what is the name? It is more like a political contract, we can say. Why there is need? There is necessity in the Hobbesian context, because state of nature में क्या था? Anarchy. But for Locke, it is to overcome the inconveniences. Inconvenience की वजह से problem क्या हो सकता था? Danger हो सकता था. That there could be something wrong that can happen. So, to have a better life, to have a good life, right, we have. So, in order to overcome the inconveniences in state of nature, because there was no common judicial authority, no common source of law like that, apart from the natural law, neither there was a executive. So, that's why to overcome these inconveniences, we come and formulate the social contract. Then, it is a contract between whom? It is a contract amongst everyone, because there is a strong element of consent in his contract, right? Now, nature is also limited and specific. On the other hand, what is the nature of Hobbesian contract? It is unlimited, right? Once you form the contract, it will be very difficult to dissolve the sovereign. And who will become supreme and absolute? The sovereign or the Leviathan will become supreme. यहाँ पर ऐसे नहीं होगा, ठीक है? Now, what is the body that will be created then? State will be the body that will be created. Sovereignty, supreme power is with the people, right? So, the state sovereignty was there. Where? In Hobbesian idea, okay? So, here sovereignty lies with the people. Now, is it binding? No, it is not binding on the future generation. They can change, which means there will be some element of resistance that he is providing. So, he talks of two contracts. One is like the contract which leads to political society or civil society, the first aspect. And second, this political contract which leads to the government, which will form a representative. And what is the government like? Government is like a trustee, which means it exists as long as people's faith in the government. As long as government does something wrong, it can be changed. So yes, we can say he is a key advocate of representative form of government. Alright. Now, so government he establishes as a trustee. Alright. Now, so contract is more, now, so don't confuse the term social contract. Just understand the specificity of it in Lockean sense. Because we say that, in state of nature society existed. So we say, unka social contract ko social contract bulana misnomer hai. Let's call it more of a political contract, because a political authority is being created. Fine. But yes, he remains a thinker of social contract tradition, because state for him is not natural, like thinkers Aristotle and Plato. State for him is artificial creation. By that virtue, he becomes the what? He becomes the propagator of the social contract tradition. Understood? Now, let's talk about his theory of separation of powers. Now, why is he justifying the theory of separation of powers? So, we need to understand that he establishes a limited government, right? And he says that government acts like a trustee. So, he does not establish an absolute sovereign or state as sovereign in that sense. Fine? Now, so separation of power is there between the legislature and the executive. Okay? Why? Why there is separation? Because he wants to create the governmental machinery in such a way that there is no possibility of abuse of power. Okay? So, he says it will act like a prevention against abuse of power. It will scientifically enable to structure a government and ensure that no one will acquire too much of power. So, when there is a separation between the legislature and executive, no single organ can acquire too much power. Okay? Now, let's move towards the next concept. So, Locke is described as the theorist of consent, resistance, and tolerations. So, why we say that he is a theorist of consent, which means the creation of the political authority is based on the willingness of the individuals who are composing it. But does it mean that common consent implies unanimity in the Lockean sense? No. Common consent does not mean unanimity. Unanimity means everybody has to agree. No. He says common consent implies will of the majority. So majority rule or majority's agreement is enough to have the formation of the government, and that's how representative governments are. We say that it is a government elected by majority and not necessarily by unanimity. Okay, so yes, on one hand he does provide an element of consent, but common consent in this context does not imply unanimity. Okay, now so he says yes, a government based on consent is necessary condition for legitimacy of the political society. Now, second is we call him as a theorist of resistance. So, do you think he is a revolutionary? Do you think he likes resistance? No. He is not a revolutionary. He does not like revolt. He does not like rebellion. He does not like resistance. He provides that element of resistance as a measure of last resort. Okay. So, he is very conservative in temperament like that. He is not like Marx who likes resistance. Fine. So we can see no clear answers as such, the right of rebellion or resistance that he is providing. However, only majority has the right to revolt. In this context, we see Mill is more liberal. Why? Because he says even if one person says an opinion which is different from majority, that opinion can be true. But for Locke, it implies will of majority. If majority resist and they feel that this thing that the government is doing is not fair, it's okay. But it cannot be will of the minority. So, it leads to basis for majoritarianism. But who takes it to a greater and deeper level is Mill. Because for him, even minority rights matter a lot. Even what is the opinion of minority, truth can emerge even from there for Mill. Okay? Now, so that's why it said, if someone is truly liberal, it is Mill. Fine? Now, next concept is he is a theorist of toleration. Now, understand something. He says, he does not like any concept of innate ideas. Innate ideas, matlab that is pre-existing in an individual. Because it is against toleration. Why? Innate idea that always exists will claim to be absolute truth. So he says, everybody will think I possess the absolute truth. What the other person is saying has no value. Right? So he says, the idea of tabula rasa, right? Mind is a clean slate, implies the value of toleration in Lockean philosophy. Understood? So he says we should not believe in anything like innate ideas. They are unscientific. Fine? And scientific truth can be established through toleration. We should be open to accepting diversity of opinions. Fine? That's why even if whatever religion he believed, he always respected lot of toleration of different religion within the state. Okay? So understand this. So tabula rasa is in contrast to natural rights which are innate or natural law which is innate. But toleration is in consonance with the what? Tabula rasa. That we don't have any innate ideas. Innate ideas lead to claiming of absolute truth. But individual should be open to accepting diversified views and not claiming to the finality of truth. So he is truly a theorist of toleration. That is what he talks about in an essay concerning human understanding. All right. Now, so whatever religion is a sphere of private life. So Whatever they want to practice in their private life, we should allow. There should not be interference of state in the matters of religion and faith. Okay. Now let's see comparison between Hobbes and Locke. Even though I have devised the whole lecture and its theme where you can make the key differences, let's sum it up, because nowadays we are seeing questions in UPSC which are very comparative in nature. Already comparison between Plato and Aristotle has also come, Kautilya and Machiavelli has also come. So there can be a question in future which compares what? Hobbes and Locke. Now, so it is said that Locke is less logical but more sensible than Hobbes. So this is one of the key basis of how we have to look. Who says this? Vapor says this. Okay. Now, let's see what is the similarity. So both are product of their times. Both are propagators of social contract theory. Both say state is one which is based on consent. Both say the original contract is irrevocable. Though Locke provides the resistance against government, but contract is irrevocable. Why? As soon as you remove the contract, we will go back to the state of nature. So contract is irrevocable because it has happened with consent, right? So in terms of irrevocability of the contract, what is there? It is existing. Future generations can have a new government according to whom? Locke. And obviously no new sovereign according to Hobbes. Then there is, because he establishes state as the supreme sovereign. That's why then there is no question over there. Fine. Both are secular in their philosophy, law of nature based on reason, right? And minimal state is something that both are agreeing on. Now let's see what is the contrast. So first is with respect to human nature. Second is with respect to, one says anarchy in state of nature, one says no, it is a society also exists. There is natural rights also, there is natural law also. Then nature of contract, one's contract is total in nature and Lockean contract is partial in nature, because society existed, only political authority and then government by will of majority is being formed. Okay. Natural rights, contrast is there. Fine. Why? Because one believes and the other says that it is wholesale liberty without protection enforcement, doesn't make sense. Then the type of government that both are establishing is also varying, and to what context they provide the right to rebel. So there is absolute political absolutism in Hobbes. On the other hand, there is still will of majority can have the right to resistance to, though in a conservative sense in Locke also, but it is still given. Alright, so yes, we can see there is a lot of key Lockean legacy and in the entire liberal philosophy that remains very vital. And we study him also when we study liberalism as a school in international relations. So Locke's influence has been there. If we look at the American society, the American political system, right? Even in this context, Locke remains a lot of relevance because of the separation of powers that he is talking. Alright, so I hope you have understood the context, just some specific terms that how they have used, the meaning behind them, right? They will differ in some sense, but don't confuse yourself too much with these aspects. Alright, thank you so much. All the best.